So good afternoon and welcome. This is Smart Modeling for Building Performance, brought to you by Sketchup and Sefaira. My name is Kurger Truesdell. I'm a resident architect here at Sefaira, and I'm joined today by Josh Riley, who's on the marketing team at Sketchup.
Yeah, so a few of us came to New York this week. We're from Boulder, Colorado. We wanted to join the Sefaira people and present some skills that you might need that are specific to the Sefaira extension. So that's kind of the main goal of our webinar is SketchUp techniques that are very specific to using Sefaira with SketchUp. And yeah, my goal is to help everybody learn more about SketchUp and get better. So if you hear us talk about anything that you might need a little more information about, you can go to sketchup.com, and at the bottom of that homepage you'll see links to great things like the Knowledge Center, the SketchUp blog, and if you want to follow us on social media, you can find stuff there. So again, that's sketchup.com, and just cruise down to the bottom of that page and you'll find that stuff there.
Great, thanks Josh. Before we get started today, I just want to talk a little bit about the presentation's focus. Josh mentioned modeling techniques that support, that are good within SketchUp and within Sefaira. So we're definitely going to cover those. But we're doing that in order to empower you to design with performance in mind. If you're unfamiliar with Sefaira or unfamiliar with this process, you may not know that it's actually now possible to assess energy and daylight and performance as you design. So that's what you're going to be seeing today, and you're going to be seeing it through the lens of efficient modeling techniques and efficient analysis techniques. So with that bit of introduction, let's get started.
Okay, so you can see that I've got a new SketchUp file here, and we're looking at our friend Steve there, a little scale figure. So the first thing we want to do to pull in some site context is in the File menu. If you go to Geolocation, Add Location, we'll be able to type in an address here. I'm already kind of zoomed into what I'm looking for. You can see up here I typed our address. It's in Chicago, and then once you zoom into that level, you can kind of change the zoom level a little bit to specify the parameters of what you want to pull into SketchUp. So our site is roughly this area right here, and so I like that, and I'm going to click on Select Region, and I have another chance to define what exactly comes into SketchUp. That looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to click on Grab, and two things are going to come into SketchUp: the satellite imagery and also a little bit of terrain information. Our site's pretty flat, so the terrain's not going to be real obvious, but I know that on the poll there it said there was a few SketchUp newbies around, so I'll show you how to do that. So Window, open up the Layers box here, and you'll notice that I've got Google Earth Snapshot and Terrain. You can toggle these on or off. You can see that the terrain, there's a little bit of terrain going on this side, but it's not real obvious, but some sites that's going to be really important to consider. And if you're also curious, another way to do that, if you go to the View Tool Palettes and choose Google, the Google toolbar allows you to toggle that on and off. So if you watch here, I'll click on Toggle Terrain, and if you watch these check marks, all that's doing is switching those two layers. And so I'm going to keep that on the snapshot for now. And the goal here is just to use the satellite imagery as a way to start helping us figure out the buildings surrounding our site right here. So I'm going to breeze through this part and then we'll move on, but basically I'm just going to grab a rectangle tool, draw around the basic footprint here just to get a kind of a rough massing. Of course, I don't know the height of this right now, so that's why I'm going to cruise over to Google Earth. And it's important to note that Google Earth Pro is now free, which is pretty awesome. So anybody can do any of the measurements I'm about to do right here because the Pro version is now free. And what I'm going to do is click on, you can tell I'm already zoomed into this site, so it looks very similar there. I've got 3D buildings turned on, so if you don't see those, take a look over on the left side. 3D buildings should be an option to check on. And I want to measure the height of a surrounding building here. Let's go with this one right there. So if you click on this ruler icon at the top, you'll see this bunch of tabs you can choose from here. We don't want to use the first two, line or path, because those are going to measure a distance between 2 points on the ground. We want to go vertical. So if you go to 3D path, don't forget to change the units here. I'm going to stick with feet, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, get a good view. Click on the top corner of that building, then click on the ground, and you can see it's approaching 180 feet. So right now that's really all I need. So I'm going to close Google Earth. I've got what I'm looking for height right here. Close that down, go back into SketchUp, and now I know that this building, if you look in the bottom right here, I'm just going to start the push-pull and type in 180 for 180 feet. And so you can see I just keep doing that for each of the buildings, and I'll minimize this window and open up another SketchUp model. So with this one, we've got all the site context in place, and of course, if you've used SketchUp before, you probably know that you can import buildings that are geolocated, and if you want to learn more about that, we'll send that resource to you after the webinar, but we've got a nice hour-long video that's site modeling in SketchUp, and that'll take you through the details of how to really specify exact buildings and where they're located if your site does have that. Not every site's going to have buildings that are going to work well that way, but if you do have those, you might want to take a look at that video and think a little more about how to do that. So I'll toss it back over to Kurger now.
Great, thanks Josh. So now that we have our context in the model, we're ready to get started with analysis. So like I said earlier, we're going to look at kind of two ways to do this. One is native to SketchUp, and then the other is going to be through the Sefaira plugin. And so this first one, actually, Josh will be demoing again, and he'll be doing some analysis with shadow studies. And then he'll hand it back to me, and we'll go through some Sefaira analysis. So let's get started with that. All right.
Okay, so now we're back on the same SketchUp model here. And yeah, we're talking about shadows in SketchUp. The first thing we should do is go to the window menu and open up the shadows box. And that's right over here. You may have noticed that I'm on the Mac version of SketchUp, but no worries. There's not going to be a lot of differences in what we're doing today between the Mac and Windows version of SketchUp. One thing to note is on the shadow settings box, don't forget about this little icon up here on the right. The Windows version also has a similar button that'll expand that for a few more options. So I'm going to keep that closed for now. And these shadow sliders here, the bottom one is for the month, and the top one is time of day. You can see here that the shadows aren't actually appearing. That's because I don't have them turned on. So you can affect these sliders but not see shadows. So don't forget, you may want to go here to turn on shadows in the view menu. It's a little bit easier though to do that through this icon in the shadows box. So I'm just going to use this to toggle on shadows. So maybe let's get a good view here and see what these the neighbor buildings are doing here. What's going on surrounding our building. If I scrub from January all the way through December, you can see how that changes, and it's pulling this information based on the geolocation. And to kind of prove that, we'll go back into model info here, and I'll just show you that it does have a location, Chicago, and it's got a very specific latitude and longitude, so that's pretty important. And you can always check that if you pull in a site and you kind of want to go back and check that out. Window model info, geolocation on the left side, and that's where that information lives. So yeah, I can also scrub the time of day slider here. That's pretty useful. And that's pretty much it for shadows. It's obviously pretty important for project stakeholders, people like the client, the design team, and oftentimes it's necessary for permit submittal. So this is a good thing to know in SketchUp.
Great, thanks Josh. On that note, Josh mentions why this is important, right? Why we care about doing a shadow study. On the one hand, it gives us insight into the design. On the other, sometimes it's critical for communication with the team, right, with the clients. On that note, what I'm going to do now is pull up a SketchUp model as well and talk a little bit about the analysis tools in Sefaira, because we just saw Josh demonstrate the tools that exist within SketchUp. Now I'm going to do an overview of what Sefaira offers and the analysis you can pull from there. Right now, I think you should be seeing my screen. And those of you familiar with Sefaira already know what you're looking at. Those of you who aren't, you see a lot of colors and a lot of numbers over here. And we're going to go through all of them. But first, I need to do one certain thing to ensure my model is ready for analysis. So you'll see right now I have selected the massing, basically the contextual massing. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this is set up right for Sefaira. And what I mean by that is we want it to be tagged as shading so that Sefaira understands it as shading. And we also want to remove any floors from these models because if they have floors, Sefaira will think they're buildings and start analyzing them as such, and we don't want it to do that. So I'll orbit around here. We don't have floors. I did this ahead of time, so I got rid of the floors. And then I'm going to do a show entity types in Sefaira. And this is telling me what Sefaira is analyzing. So I'm happy with this. I see that all my context is tagged as shading, and my building over here is tagged as appropriate, wall, glazing, roof, etc. So I'll go ahead and hide those. Let's see that floor plan again. Let's unhide that. Perfect. Okay, so now we're back to the beginning, and now we can look at the Sefaira plugin itself. So basically, what you need to get started with Sefaira analysis, you need four things. We've already got the model geometry. That's number one. So we have a building in place. We just did a check to make sure that it was tagged appropriately. Those elements are all correct as far as Sefaira's analysis is concerned. So we have the model geometry in place. That's number one. Number two is a use type. And for those of you unfamiliar with this kind of analysis, this is important because this informs energy use. An office is going to have different types of energy use than a school building or a hospital. So that's why we select a use type for this building. The third input is the location. So similar to how Josh showed us shadows based on location and then time of day and over the course of the year, we want to understand our performance analysis for the specific location because this gives us weather data and also informs our daylighting. And then the fourth input is the building properties themselves. So if you're involved with architectural design, you know that after the design concept is achieved, you have to do some detailed work around the building components, like the building envelope, the type of glass you use, the wall type you use, etc. And so this image here, this is what you're seeing, this is where you change and modify those properties in Sefaira. So right now what I've done is I've populated all these sliders based on an industry standard baseline. And these come preset in Sefaira, and I can select one. And then I select the appropriate climate zone, and my properties are set up. If I want, as I design, I can change these, adjust them, etc. But for now, for today, I'm just going to revert back to that standard baseline of values. And so that's it. I mean, that's how you set up the analysis. You need those four inputs: model geometry, use type, location, and building properties. So, we're good to go. We're set up. Now we want to understand what Sefaira is telling us. We have two ways on the plugin and then a visual way with daylighting to understand that. I'm going to walk through this dashboard here, these three dials, and talk a little bit about each. This first one is giving us an understanding of energy use. Specifically, it's expressing energy use from an annual standpoint and as it relates to square footage. So that's where that 30 number comes from. That's related to annual use and square footage. The reason we do that is because it compares well to a industry standard benchmark known as the 2030 Challenge benchmark. If you're unfamiliar with that, that's an industry effort to get building energy use down to zero by 2030. This second dial, right now, I don't know that I'm not too concerned about it. This is just telling me where my energy segments are, where my energy is being used. As I refine the design, I'll probably want to know more about this, and I'll return to this dial later, but that's what this is for. Right now, specifically, it's telling me that I have most of my energy going towards cooling the building. That's why we see cooling dominated. This third dial here is telling me a little bit about daylighting. We've got three measures right there: underlit, well lit, and glare, and then they have numbers next to them. The numbers represent the percentage of floor area that are either underlit, well lit, or receiving glare. And those metrics align with LEED version 4 metrics. So well lit is telling me I have adequate lighting at the work surface, and glare is telling me I have too much direct light within my space. So keep an eye on this as we continue through today's session. We'll see it change as we make changes to our various models. Another way we analyze daylight is through this daylight visualization tool. I'm going to let it populate in the corner here while I talk about one last thing in the plugin. And that's this element performance diagram. And the reason this is important is because the dashboard gives us a high-level understanding of our building performance. I know what my energy use is, but I may not know what to do about it. What's causing my energy use increase or decrease? What's causing me to have a cooling-dominated building? This colorful diagram, this thick red ribbon, is telling me that I should probably pay attention to the west solar gain. So here I've got a lot of glass, and I'm getting a lot of solar gain in the space that I have to offset with mechanical cooling. So moving forward, we'll return to some of this and see how this will change as we change our models and update our design. With that, I'll just quickly show you daylight visualization just to get a sense of what it is that we'll look at. I'll go over this later in a later section. But this is basically the introduction to the Sefaira Analysis plugin and what you can get out of it and what you should be looking at as you build and analyze. So with that, we've covered context and we've covered analysis tools. I'd like to move forward now and talk a little bit about architectural elements. So we're essentially pushing our design forward, moving from a conceptual stage into a more refined stage. And so the question remains, how do we get architectural elements like shading devices or interior partitions into our model in an efficient way that supports analysis? So I'm going to hand it over to Josh, and he's going to take that on and start with interior partitions and look at how we can get those into the model efficiently.
Okay, here we are again in this same model, and I just saw a question come across regarding factoring in interior partitions, so that's exactly what we're going to show here. So the first thing we want to do is actually kind of prep this model for a little SketchUp surgery. We really want to dig into a specific floor here. We're going to go with the second floor. But first, let's get the context out of the way. It's already on its own separate layer. So if you see up here in my layers box here, if I uncheck context buildings, that goes away. Get a better view here. And because we're in an early conceptual design phase, our model is just kind of exposed raw geometry. So if I do a quick triple click, I get everything is kind of connected there. So we do have to do a little bit of SketchUp surgery. And the first thing I want to do is get a perpendicular view looking at my facade here. An easy way to do that in SketchUp is to right click and choose Align View. If you right click on any surface, you have an option to align the view to get a perpendicular view of that. And we also don't want perspective on temporarily. So I'm going to go to the camera menu and uncheck perspective. Again, that lives in the camera menu, and we're going to uncheck perspective. So that's looking good there. I'm going to go to my select tool now, and it's good to note with the select tool you can go two different directions. If you go from left to right, you have a solid line there for the selection box. If you go from right to left, it'll be dashed. And the difference is with the dashed direction there, from right to left, anything that enters into that box, any SketchUp geometry inside that selection window will be selected. For what we're doing here, I prefer to go from left to right, and in this case, only entities that fall within that window will be selected. So that looks good right there. Try to get this second floor. Once I have that selected, I can right click and choose to make component. And it's good practice to name all your components. That'll help you out later on if you start getting a lot of components. Naming is good. I'm going to call this one second floor, and then make sure that replace selection with component is checked there, so create. And so now that that is created as a component, if I double click, I can enter the edit mode for that component. And so in this case, it's a little bit tough to see what's going on. So if I go to the view menu and component edit, I can hide the rest of the model. So if I click on that, you'll see that the rest of the model is temporarily not visible, which helps me a lot when I'm trying to look at specific geometry. So the whole goal here was to isolate this geometry so I can get into the second floor plate. So now if I double click on this surface, I can see there's a little more that needs to be selected, so I hold down Shift and double click once more, and now that is all selected. And as I mentioned before, what we're trying to do here is isolate the second floor plate. So I'm going to right click on that, make component, and I already have a component named second floor. So for now I'm just going to rename this one second floor plate, kind of the same process there. And if I double click, you'll see I can enter into the edit mode for that. And this is a nested component. For what we're doing today, I'm going to actually explode the first component that I made, and you'll see why. So I'm going to use the escape key or just click off outside of the bounding box, and I'm going to right click and explode that first one. That was just temporary to jump into the right geometry. And so now I'm left with one component here that's kind of tough to click on. I'm going to go back and turn on perspective. So it's really tough to pick that floor plate. So a good tool here is the outliner in SketchUp. And if you've never used the outliner, if you go into Window and you'll look for outliner, a lot of these boxes in SketchUp, if you're not sure where stuff is, the window menu has a lot of these. So again, that's in Window, Outliner. And the outliner is kind of a text-based view of things in your model. So you can see here I've got second floor plate is an option. And just like if I were to click on the geometry in the model, I can double click on this text here to jump into that specific component, which is pretty nice here. And I do want to show the shortcut for hide rest of model, because you probably don't want to go into this menu every time and then hide rest of model and keep doing that. It's kind of tough to do that every time. So I'll show you how to make a shortcut right now. I'm on the Mac version, as I mentioned before, and that's located in SketchUp Preferences. If you're on Windows, that'll be in the Window menu. So if you're looking for the Preferences choice and you're on Windows, that'll be in the Window menu, and you'll see Preferences down here. But on the Mac, it's SketchUp Preferences, and you're looking for a shortcut on the left there. And I just want to type into the filter box here what I'm looking for. I'm looking for hide rest of model, and there it is. I've already assigned my H key to that. If I wanted to change it, I could. So if you want to make that a shortcut yourself, just type it in there, and on the Mac it'll automatically be created as a shortcut. If you're on the Windows version, there's a few more clicks involved, but it's just basically you'll see the ability to assign a key to any function. All right, so H is my hide rest of model shortcut, and you'll see here if I double click back into that floor plate and I tap H, even as I'm modeling, it's pretty nice to have that as a pretty quick shortcut. Helps you model quick, it's much more efficient. So the whole goal of all this was to throw in some interior partitions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a combination of tools. I'm going to use the tape measure tool to give myself some guides. You don't have to use this tool, you can simply use the line tool, but I wanted to show this just in case people were new to SketchUp and haven't seen this before. Notice, first of all, with a lot of tools in SketchUp, at the bottom here, some tools have keys that modify what that tool does. In this case, we can see down here, Option equals toggle create guides. If you're on Windows, that'll be Control button. It'll tell you that down there. And actually, our most recent blog post talks about tools that have these key modifiers. So if you want to check that out, let's go to the SketchUp blog, and we'll put a link up to that later on as well. So yeah, if you want to put a guide down, all you do is grab the tape measure tool, click on a line, and you can kind of offset a guideline from that point. Note that if you tap the keyboard modifier and you don't see the guide show up, it's possible you don't have guides turned on. And the view menu, just like shadows, you had to engage that to see shadows. Guides are also there, so you may want to do that if you're not seeing the guideline. And you can type in a distance here. I'm going to go 10 feet, enter from both sides. And let's go 25 feet from there. Then I can grab the line tool and trace. I'm going to keep it real simple for this example, but let's say those are some interior walls, and you can treat those guides like any geometry in SketchUp. If you go to the eraser tool, you can erase those guides, or if you've got a bunch of them, you may prefer to go to Edit and Delete Guides, and that gets rid of those. And so an important thing to note here when we're talking about using SketchUp in conjunction with Sefaira, one of the things you need to do here when you're making interior floors is actually raise up the bottom of the wall a little bit above the floor. And I'll do this and I'll have Kurger talk about this while I'm doing it.
Sure, great, thanks Josh. Yeah, so Josh will draw up those walls, and the point he's making about raising the bottom edge off the floor is important because of how Sefaira maps the daylighting performance onto your floor plane. Basically, if you had the bottom edges of those walls right on the floor, there would be a bit of an offset where the wall exists, and the graphic representation wouldn't be quite representative of what's really going on. So that's why you just raise the wall, the base of the wall up slightly from the floor to ensure that the graphic representation is correct and how insightful for you. Perfect. All right, so I think, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like we've got the walls in place, and now maybe it makes sense to talk about what we do with that from an analysis standpoint.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So let's see. I'll go ahead and grab the screen. Perfect. I think folks can see it now. Yes, there we go. Awesome. Okay, so we're back in my model here, and this is actually a second model where I've copied the interior partitions that Josh created. So those interior partitions are in place. That's fantastic. But you'll notice that we don't see any of those, bright colors or spinning dials or numbers anymore over here. We're not getting any analysis results. And so I'll draw your attention to a kind of an update we need to make following Josh's modeling. I'll go ahead and use that trick he talked about before, which was a line view. I like that one. And I'll also show you, well, basically I'll talk about what I'm going to do and walk through what I'm doing. We need to basically explode the components that Josh made. So Josh made components of floors because it helped him access the interior space easily, and he was able to model the walls easily from the get-go. Unfortunately, Sefaira is a bit confused right now because the building doesn't have any floors. Right now they're housed on components, and those are core pieces of the building that Sefaira needs to understand. So I'm going to go over to the outliner here and actually go ahead and explode these components. All right, and you see immediately Sefaira springs to life. It has floors to analyze, and so it goes ahead and does that. Now I realize you're probably sitting there thinking, well, thanks a lot, Kurger. How am I going to get back in there and edit my walls? You can actually use the section cut tool, and yeah, there we go. And actually, you can move that up and down and access the walls to edit them this way. Another thing to note and to mention, after Josh's modeling, another thing that we'll want to do is make sure that the interior walls he created are the right entity type. You'll remember we did that with our contextual shading. We wanted to make sure that it was a shading element. We're actually going to do the same thing with these elements. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask Sefaira to tell me what it's analyzing, so show entity types. And because we prepared this model ahead of time, we assigned the right value or right property to these elements. But in the case that you have a question, you're not sure if they're being read as such, or if you need to actively change them to be shading, this is how you would do it. You could first check what they are, and then select and go ahead and change here. So in this case, I don't need to change it, but if I did, I could select a new material and hit apply. So that's really what I wanted to find out, and I used the section cut to do it. So let me get rid of that section. Perfect. All right, so now we've got walls in place. We're starting to flesh out our design with more architectural elements. It's probably a good idea to check out our daylight visualization, considering that we just put some barriers up inside. We want to understand how well or how poorly our daylighting strategy is performing in relation to our space plan. So I'll go ahead and open that up. And as promised, I will do an overview here now of what we're seeing, because we saw this briefly earlier, but we didn't get much into detail about what it's actually telling us. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Right now you'll see up at this right area here, we can see daylight on our model from a time of day standpoint. So similar to how Josh used shadows at a time of day, we can do that here. We can also see it from an annual perspective. So how is the performance how is our strategy performing over the course of a year. So right now we've got a colorful drawing in front of us, and we want to know what it means. I'll draw your attention to this lower portion because this is the legend, the key that tells us what these colors mean. And this is basically telling us that this on our floor plan, the percentage of occupied hours where we have a certain amount of light measured at about desk height. So these dark areas, we don't really have 300 lux for very much of the year. These bright areas, we absolutely have 300 lux over the course of the year. So, why is 300 lux? What is that? Why does it matter? 300 lux is a measure of illuminance, and it matters because it aligns with the lead version 4 metric, and because it expresses reasonable task lighting from a natural daylighting standpoint. Now, another metric that we're concerned about when we're looking at daylighting is glare. I think you'll remember that from our overview of this dial here. So the well-lit area is the 300 lux. The glare is where we're receiving 1,000 lux or more. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle this bar all the way up to 1,000 lux. And then I'm going to pay attention to my heat map again to understand where, over the course of a year, I may have problem areas, where I absolutely have at least 1,000 lux. So we should see that analysis come back pretty quickly. While it's, oh, there we go, perfect, okay. I was going to say, while it's chugging away, I'll draw your attention here to the floors, and that I can view these, one by one or in conjunction with each other. So that can be helpful if you're looking at a specific space plan on a specific floor. Okay, so now I feel pretty comfortable because I'm not getting significant glare throughout the year. There are a few components of my building where I do receive that. And we'll talk in a moment about strategies to mitigate harsh daylighting conditions. So that's kind of the step from architectural element to analysis that we wanted to display. And I also want to draw your attention now to another step that you might want to take, which is analyzing the building properties now that you've made these changes to your design. Bear with me while I update my project information. I want to make sure this is all consistent. Okay, you can see it's analyzing based on that change. And what we should see soon is that famous red ribbon that we began with. There we go. So we did this work with interior partitions. We looked at it from a daylighting standpoint to inform our space planning, but we haven't done much to mitigate this issue where we have significant heat gain on our windows that we have to offset with mechanical cooling. So I'm going to hand it over to Josh, and he's going to walk through applying shading devices, which are a powerful solution to this performance issue. And he's going to work through doing that on model in SketchUp.
Okay, as Kurger mentioned, I'm going to throw on some more elements here to our facade. We're going to do a very simple awning. So I'm going to zoom into one of these windows here and draw a real simple plane to represent an awning. And this is a great chance to show one of our new tools. It's called the rotated rectangle tool. And this is a pretty recent addition to the tool set. You'll find it nested in that rectangular icon here, rotated rectangle. When you first click on this tool, you're going to notice it looks very similar to the rotate tool. What we want to do first is figure out the starting point for this rectangle. I don't want to put this right on top of the window, so I'm going to hover on this endpoint and then hover slightly up just above a little bit, a few inches above, and I'm going to start my rectangle there. So with this tool, I'm actually going to use it to measure the width of this window real quickly. I can hold down Shift to lock that inference, hover over this edge. It tells me it's 3 feet wide. I want to go 1 foot beyond that, so I'm going to hover in that green axis direction and type in 4 feet, enter. And once I do that, I also have the ability to hover in the red direction, and I want to come out about 2 feet, and that creates that rectangle there. Of course, the left side needs to be adjusted, so I'm going to tap spacebar. That's the default shortcut for the select tool, so it's pretty handy just to use the spacebar button to go back into that select tool. click on this line here, and then I'm going to go to the Move tool, and then just move that line out about 1 foot. Zoom out a little bit, looks pretty good. And then I'm going to double click on that to select the surface plus the bounding edges, then right click and make component. As I mentioned before, it's always good to give your component a name so you can find it later if needed. I'm going to call this one Awning version 1, and then create. And you know what, I'm going to go back and redo that to show you guys that one more time, just in case that's kind of breeze through that too quick for some of the new SketchUp users. Go to this rectangle tool, rotated rectangle, hover on this part, start the rectangle there. I know I want to go 4 feet in this direction, and I want to come out 2 feet in the red direction, and then I'm going to click on this line, use the Move tool, hover over 1 foot, looks good, double click to get that geometry, right click, make component. I'm going to name this one Awning version 1, click on create, and it's going to ask me it lets me know that it already exists because it still exists in SketchUp. I just made it. I'm going to replace that. All right, looks good. And now to copy this component over to the adjacent windows, a nice way to do that is to select the component and then use the Move tool, but I don't need to click on the geometry itself. You can reference other geometry as long as it's pre-selected. So that's pre-selected. I can click on this corner of the window and start to move it. If I tap, as I see down in the bottom here, Option equals copy. So on the Mac, Option is copy. On the Windows, that'll be the Control key. So I've got that copy there. Click on the same reference point of the other window, and I'll make that copy. Do that a few more times here. Click to start the move, and you can toggle Option or Control at any time. You don't have to hold it down. Do that once more over here. And because I made that a component, any change that I make to one is reflected upon every instance of that component, as you can see there. And I'm tapping the H key that I made before to show or hide rest of model. So if I want to make a change to this awning, we know that it will be reflected upon every other component there. So I could take the arc tool, make an adjustment there, and that's reflected upon the other ones. What I want to show you here now is if I make a copy of one of these components and make that unique, I can then make another version of that component. So I'm going to copy one more time over to this window. And the important step here is to right-click on this new component right there. So it's still tied to the other components. However, if I right-click on it and make unique, it's going to make that a unique component. So it's no longer tied to the other ones. You can see there that change is not reflected on those other ones. It's its own unique component. So now if I make an adjustment to this one, let's say we double-click in there, use our line tool, draw a line across the top, take the Move tool, and we can adjust that. I'm going to throw that hide rest of model view back on. And don't forget, in SketchUp, it's good practice to always orbit as you're modeling. You can use your mouse to help you do that. So it's good to give yourself the right view for the job. I'm going to hover in the vertical direction, type in 1 foot, and I can always orbit and still change my mind if I don't change tools here. I can type in 1'6", a little bit tall there. Let's go with 1'3". I like that better. Exit out of that. And let's say that you like that version 2 better. There's a quick way to replace your other components where you select version 1, for example, and then I can replace that with version 2 that I just made. And to do that, I'm going to use my components browser. So that is in the window menu, and you'll see components. And so in this view here, in this box, I'm able to locate my components that I just made. And for example, if I wanted to do that replace that I just talked about, or reload components, I can right-click on Awning version 1, select instances, and you'll see all those become selected. And then now all I have to do is locate the new one that I made. And here it's Awning. It's actually not named what I would like. So I'm going to go over to that component, click on that again. And I can rename that through the entity info box. So let me show you where that is. I like to have this box open when I model in SketchUp. It's in the window menu, entity info. And for example, I've got this component selected, and there's the name. I'd rather have that be Awning version 2. And so that's pretty easy to change that there. And back in the component browser, you can see that updated. And if let me go back and start the reload again. If I want to select all these components, I just right click on version 1, select instances. You can see those become selected. Then I can right click on version 2 and replace selected. And you'll see that change right there. So if I go back into my layers box there and turn on the awnings layer, I've got a bunch of those simple components there. So again, if I wanted to add version 2 to all of those, just go into the components browser and I can right click on that component, select instances. You can see all of these become selected, then locate the one that I want to reload it with. Right here, right click, replace selected, and you can see that updates and all of those become the new version. And I think that's it for my part there, so back to you, Kurger.
Cool, excellent, thank you, Josh. Yeah, so basically I've got an eye on the clock, and we are going to be cutting it close here because we have one more thing to cover. So we just talked about architectural elements. Now we're going to be focused on entourage. So we're going to try and do this quickly. Our hope is to get to, because we have a lot of great questions in the bank right now, so our hope is to get through this quickly, field some questions, and whatever we don't field, of course, we'll follow up with afterwards. So Josh, why don't we take a quick look at entourage, and then hopefully get to some of the great questions that we've got coming through.
All right, so due to time, I'll cruise through this a little bit quick, as Kurger mentioned, we're going to talk about using the 3D warehouse to add some entourage to our model. So in this case, I'm going to go to this little icon up here, and if you can't see that, if you hover over it, it says Get Models, and that'll be the 3D warehouse icon there. That's important to note. If you're new to the 3D warehouse, you can also access the 3D warehouse externally from your browser outside of SketchUp. But it's actually better to use it within SketchUp because then you can download any models you find directly into your model. So if this is new to you, the 3D warehouse is a great place to find a bunch of pre-built components and SketchUp models to throw into your model that you don't have to make yourself. So as I said, I'm going to kind of cruise through this real fast here. We're looking for a tree in this example to toss into our model next to our building. It's important to note that if you just simply search for tree in the 3D warehouse, you're going to find a lot of different options. And we want to find something that's going to perform well in Sefaira and in SketchUp. So for SketchUp, we really want a model that is not excessive in geometry, and we call that low poly. So low polygon count. So that's a search term that we can use in the 3D warehouse. If we type in low poly elm tree, for example, let's see what we get there. Got a couple options. I'm going to go with number 2 here. Get an expanded view, and if you want to, you can click on the orbit icon there and get a closer look of what you might be about to download. And you can see here the stats on the side has 8 polygons. That's pretty light. The imagery is doing the work here in this model, and that's actually going to be fine for us. We just want it to produce a proper shadow and look good in our model. So I'm going to download that. It's going to confirm that I want to download this directly into my SketchUp model. So there it is. I can place that where it needs to go. And I think that's pretty much it for this. If you want, I'll pass it back over to Kurger, and while I do that, I'll turn on shadows and just kind of show you that.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh. That's great. Let me get my screen up here. Okay, so let me do a quick overview of what we talked about today. 4 topics. We looked at site context. We looked at analysis tools, both within SketchUp and within Sefaira. We looked at getting architectural elements into the model, right? So starting from a basic model within context, adding those elements to get more refinement into our understanding of the design. And then finally, managing entourage appropriately from a modeling and analysis standpoint. So those are the key takeaways for today. Josh, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add, but I think maybe I'll go ahead and close the session today.
Yep, that's it for me.
Okay. So like we said before, it's been our great pleasure to showcase these strategies and these tools to you today. So with that, I think we'll sign off. And again, thank you all for joining, and we hope to be in touch with you soon. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks everyone.